I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole Workshop meeting of March 11, 2020 to order. I would like to begin by reading a safety notice. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors and obey all instructions given. And if assistance is required, please see the clerk. Clerk, please raise your hand and wave accordingly. Once you've evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of Town Hall. Please note that the Town of Lincoln committee and council meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. Please remember to silence all cellular devices. Roll call. We are currently missing Councillor Reimer and Councillor Majema, but I believe they will be coming just a little bit tardy from our original start. We have Councillor Brunet, Councillor Pachariva, Mayor Easton. We have Councillor Timmers, Councillor Mikulik, and also Councillor McPherson. Staff, we have a number of staff in attendance, all smiling and jubilant. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? There are none. Okay, we are now considering item 4.1 regarding Community Improvement Plan Workshop. I ask our CAO and Director of Planning and Development to provide some comments before we move forward with today's presentation and workshop. Mr. CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and to members of council, thank you for the opportunity to be before you to talk about the Community Improvement Plan and the various, I think, iterations of the plan. I think we're going to start really at the beginning and I think take council on a little bit of a journey, highlight what are CIPs, why we do them, what are the benefits of them, and then I think move into various examples. We're going to try to be as visual, as iterative in this workshop format with council. Of course, a number of senior staff are here to answer questions after the fact, towards the end of the presentation. I know Mr. Bruder, Ms. Dale, Mr. Deaney will have some comments to make. There are a few slides that Ms. Dale will be assisting me with. I do want to highlight for council's consideration, you have got two letters in front of you. One is from the Niagara Home Builders Association, and that letter is written by David Samus, who is the chair of their Government Relations Committee and vice president. He is the incoming president of the Niagara Home Builders Association, known to many of you. He was aware that council would be having a workshop, and so he has submitted for council consideration comments. And of course, no stranger to this council, Mr. Matt Giffen, who has benefited from a wide range of CIPs that the town offers, specifically the rural CIP. And while I think we can look at the various suite of CIPs that we have, and each of them being different, the principles for many of them do remain the same. And so you have that in front of you as well. So without further ado, I will go into the presentation. I do want to start off by saying, while I wasn't here for December, the last time we dealt with the CIP conversation, specifically looking at a draft around Prudhommes, I did field a number of media inquiries afterwards. And the reason I start off with that and suggest that is an important comment to make is I think something got lost in the translation. I think it's easy to suggest that CIPs are simply about incentivizing single-family homes. They are not. That is not the purpose of this presentation. That is not what I'm here to talk to you about. I'm here to take you through, I think, a little bit of a journey and really share with council the number of incentives that are in place, the best practices from very successful communities, large and small, to give council, I think, an idea of what that is and why staff are considering such programs. And so I beg for your indulgence as we go through the next 40 slides. Again, a lot of them are pictures. We will try to go through them. If council has any inquiries, any concerns, please feel free to stop me and I can repeat any of the slides. So from an agenda perspective, as I highlighted, we're going to spend a little time talking about what and why, the benefits of CIPs, CIP activity, current CIPs that we have in place, and the success that we are seeing as a result of those CIPs, a little bit about heritage and CIPs. We're going to share with you a little bit of the Prudhomme draft criteria examples. Again, this is not a conversation on Prudhommes. although that was where the impetus for this conversation started initially. A little bit of application of criteria, so some design examples, what's good and what's bad, and the type of development that often happens when you incentivize that development. We're going to talk to you a little bit about green infrastructure, tax credits, and again, a Prudhommes tax incremental grant program example. So first and foremost, really the what and why. This is an excerpt from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. I'm not going to read it all, but the purpose of having this in here is really to demonstrate to council there is a provincial mandate, a provincial program, and provincial criteria on how and why municipalities set up CIPs. As you can see here, I've highlighted a few words because really they're the ones that jump out to me, but council can definitely go through the various points there. Livable communities, invigorating communities, realization of environmental, social, cultural, and economic benefits, sustainable growth management, and development practices. All things that you've heard about before. You've seen them in our strategic priorities. They were in your previous strategic priorities during the previous council. So none of this, I think, comes or should come as a surprise. Municipalities for years have been using community improvement planning as one means of both planning and financing development activities to both reuse, use, and restore lands that require both building and infrastructure. So what are they? Community improvement plans are tools that allow municipalities under Section 28 of the Planning Act to enable policies and to direct funds or have policy initiatives that allow development to move forward. They're intended to encourage revitalization initiatives, stimulate development and redevelopment. And I'll take just a pause there because I think oftentimes we look at market conditions, we look at development naturally happening, we look at corridors and how all of that happens. There are a number of properties that both remain and have remained vacant for a number of years. And the reason they do that is because oftentimes municipalities are looked at to assist. A number of us went on a tour to visit affordable housing developments across the Hamilton area. We met with a group called Indowell, known to some of you and known to, I think, more of us now after that tour. There was a conversation around affordable housing and what is the municipality's role. I highlight that because if we look at the criteria that were set up under the draft Prudhommes CIP, affordable housing units and the creation of affordable housing units was highlighted in there. So it is not a one-size-fits-all. It is a number of variables that go into and a number of criteria that go into it. And the councillors that were on that tour can attest to one of the key things that we were told on that tour, and that is the municipality has to play a role in moving affordable housing development forward. Full stop, no ands, ifs, or buts. That was one of the things that was drawn on the chalkboard. In the probably very short time, we actually had a presentation where we were sitting around a board table from one of the executive directors of Indowell as a housing provider. Through community improvement plans, municipalities can focus public attention on local priorities and municipal initiatives. We can use them as ways to get what municipalities want: green space, green infrastructure, park space, other amenities. We facilitate and encourage community change in a coordinated manner and get the desire beyond the minimal. And I think it's important to highlight that it's beyond the minimal. And we stimulate private sector investment. So some of the benefits of CIPs. Really, they're focused on design guidelines, building code, which has the minimum standards that I highlighted, and that does not require green infrastructure. But again, if we tie back all the desires council has, the priorities council has, the conversations we've had around green infrastructure, semi-permeable membranes, being innovative, all those things that collectively we do what we do here as a municipality. The building code sets minimum standards. We want more than the minimum. We want better than the minimum. Upfront costs of green infrastructure are typically higher, and so sometimes we are looking at what sort of partnerships we can develop. And of course, I think what matters to our taxpayers quicker, and increase in assessment and property taxes. So this slide again highlights some of the further benefits. I won't go into each of them, but it highlights our climate adaptation plan. It highlights the town's economic development strategy, and it highlights some of the things we want to do around brownfield use and brownfield lands. This further talks about affordable housing, as I highlighted, supporting tourism development. So I highlighted sometimes we use incentive programs like CIPs to create destinations, destination parks and trails, future commercial uses. And I'll talk a little bit more about the one at Prudhommes specifically that spoke to incentivizing commercial, incentivizing industrial, and incentivizing some of those higher density uses. Oftentimes, if we create a commercial corridor, a commercial downtown, we need to support it by bringing people there. So our current CIPs and heritage. I will highlight, again, briefly, some of the CIPs that have been in place. You'll see the three listed on this first page. Our Beamsville Commercial Core and Ontario Street Corridor, the Vineland Central Business District, and the Mixed Use and Residential Intensification CIP that have been around for the better part of the last 8 to 9 years when you look at those, and we anticipate a duration of 10 years in each of them. There's programs offered in each of those that differ, but they've been listed there. Some are around look and feel, some are around building improvement, some are facade improvement, and of course, the type of programs around tax increment, financing, landscaping improvement, and development charge reduction. This slide continues. Again, our most recently adopted industrial lands in rural area CIP that we put in place last year, that council supported, and the Heritage Community Improvement Plan that dates back to 2017. So a little bit about the CIP activity, and again, this slide is busy. There's a lot going on in this slide. It really is a list of what we've seen over the last 7 years in terms of our CIPs. It highlights, as you see, the number of applications completed and approved. I'll take you to that third slide. The total cost of improvements from completed projects, little over $3.5 million. The funds allocated for completed projects, $260,000, and then that apportionment between the town and the region of funding that was given. I'll take you back to total costs of improvements. Those are inputs and impacts to the local economy of over $3.5 million with a municipal output, in this particular case, of $129,000, and almost the exact same from Niagara region. So a little bit about Prudhommes, because again, Prudhommes is where we started this conversation. Tax incremental financing was one of the criteria that we had set. I do want to make it clear again that where this is focused on, high-rise residential, commercial, Main Street mixed use, the mixed use development on the site, and employment lands. This is not about low-rise development, and while we don't have the details worked out of what that CIP will look like, I think that to council should give you some level of confidence about where we're focusing our energy. There are a number of environmental and enhanced design standards we look at, and again, we haven't figured out the details of that. We haven't figured out things around minimum height, but I just want to give you some examples of what would be included in various CIP programs. Some people talk about LEEDs, others talk about other sorts of environmental, low impact development. We have completed a secondary plan, and we hope to comply, and we'll be complying with the design guidelines. Again, design criteria can range from window covering percentages to how much underground parking there is, to light pollution, to views, to open space, to a number of other things that are highlighted there before you. Environmental sustainability. And I think sometimes, we throw these terms out. I do have some other data I can share with members of council, specifically around environmental sustainability and green infrastructure, but that includes things like energy efficiency, renewable energy, heat reduction, charging stations, water efficiency. One of the biggest issues we will face in the coming years, stormwater management, not only along the lake, but just generally around the frequency and duration and severity of storms and microbursts, plantings, native species, public realm, pedestrianization, active transportation. Again, I won't read each of them. I think they're highlighted there. These are all the things that when we're looking at a program and when we're looking at what is our desired end result, what is the goal, what do we want things to look like at the end, these are all the things we're looking at doing. Of course, housing choice and affordability. We often talk about varied housing stock. And so we look at even our existing CIPs and updating them to incorporate green infrastructure criteria, and that'll be one of the things you'll hear us come forward on. So a little bit of an application of what the design looks like. When we talk about integrated development design, what does that mean? So here's an example that includes what we would want to create in various areas. Things like commercial, office, and residential uses, small parkettes, things that are not mandated, things that are not legislated, but things that are beyond the minimum, that don't find themselves in building codes and what we need to create. So here's some things that we don't want. You know, we've highlighted a little bit of things on the left, things on the right. Poor urban design versus good urban design. So one is a cafe in Burlington, the other one is the Canary District in Toronto. I think it's obvious when you look at that, and that is not to say that the poor urban design is an unattractive building, but when you look at glazing, when you look at how buildings are created, here's what we mean when we talk about getting a better design, incentivizing what things look like and how we do things. Surface level parking versus underground parking. On the left, we see a development in Grimsby. A lot of surface level parking. Really, that's poor urban design. On the right, we see good urban design. More underground parking, more surface parking, and something built above it, but less expansive asphalt. Hardscape sidewalk versus landscape sidewalk. Again, two examples here in Toronto that show the difference between a lot of concrete and that interface between greenery and concrete. Non-landscape parking lots compared to landscape parking lots with integrated storm water management. So we've got an example here on the left of poor urban design and good urban design on the right. Landscaping with native plant species, integration within that low impact development to reduce stormwater runoff. Again, further examples, poor urban design, Upper James in Hamilton, North York, Toronto, a lot of green on both sides of that, but the way that interface happens and the way that bare landscaping is compared to using native plant landscaping, you see the difference there. I mean, I don't have to go through each of them, but it's very obvious what setting a program up to support this type of development, why it's important. What we call low-impact development, here's various parking lot techniques. Here's good examples of integrating grass and greenery and shrubs into that. It's more than just planting a tree. Sustainable roof integration. A lot of us have heard of green roofs, but there's a number of other examples of that. Living green walls, both exterior and interior. Things like electric charging stations. Again, surface parking integration, you know, how we want to do that, what that looks like, application on streets. Waterfront public art. All things that when we say we want to create community, we want to create that feeling that brings people to a place. We talk about, you know, Prudhommes, for example, being a gateway. And by no means am I suggesting that the municipality needs to be doing all of this, but we need to be working with our partners, whoever they may be, not only in this area, but across the entire municipality to create the type of public places we want to see. Soil cell integration. Again, some of the most important stuff we're going to be doing coming forward will be around looking at stormwater management. Historically, swim ponds, where how we address stormwater management. As land becomes much more unavailable and finite, we need to look at different models, different approaches, using the existing tree canopy to capture some of that water. High-rise buildings with integrated affordable housing. I highlight the word integrated in there. And again, without getting into an in-depth conversation, because we'll have time to talk about affordable housing at another workshop and another report back, the integration of looking at affordable units within an existing development is also important. Bike storage, transit, and mixed-use development, and how those interfaces happen in particular locations. And again, now as we move to partner on a region-wide basis with either the on-demand model or whatever that model expands to, both intra and inter-municipally, this again, how we create communities matters. So why require sustainable green infrastructure? I've spoken about a few of these things, but stormwater management remains at the top of that list. Air cleanliness, enhancing the pedestrian experience, making high-density areas more attractive, healthier, and livable, energy savings, and climate change. Again, here's a little bit of a visual that talks about green infrastructure and life cycle costs and the savings and why we would do it. So examples of tax credits for green infrastructure. Waterloo North has a CIP that is between 40% and 100% up to 10 years if you meet certain sustainability criteria or LEEDs. Toronto has a green and cool roof program. New York City has a property tax credit. Philadelphia has its own credits. Some members of council may say, okay, these are big city places. In looking at Waterloo region, which is made up of Cambridge, which is made up of a number of small little hamlets and towns, if you look at the suite of community improvement plan incentives that they have, and I think theirs is a good example, but we've also looked at things from Sudbury to you name it across this province. There is a suite that suits every municipality, and I think whether you're small or large, I don't like the inference of small or large. I've said that in front of this council on many times. Doing things well, whether you're a big place, a small place, always matters. But of course, I also understand council's reticence or concern around affordability, and those are an ROI, and we're going to talk about that. So examples, again, of those tax credits and what they look like. We'll take you a little bit through Prudhommes. I'll start this conversation, and Kathleen can provide more depth around this particular TIG and what this chart shows here. But you can see the bottom blue line is the pre-project property taxes collected in this particular example. The potential tax incremental grant that would be provided is this yellow shaded area. It is consistent, it has a start and an end date, and it is highlighted here. The post-project property taxes are what you see above that in that orange line. And so this is really an example, and I think in a very simplistic way, when you incentivize something, yes, there is a cost, and there is a cost in the short term. But notwithstanding that cost, there's still a net benefit to the municipality, which is that orange line. So the difference between where that yellow line ends and that orange line is your net benefit. But it does have a start and an end, and then it becomes simply tax revenue that you see beyond that. So Kathleen may have some additional comments to provide on that.
So I guess the point to make with this slide is if you look at vacant property in the municipality when it's not developed, generally speaking, the taxes aren't very high because it's assessed as vacant land. So if nothing happens over a long period of time, the taxes are basically flatlined. If the property is developed, then you will see an increase in taxes over time. So what's representative on this graph, as Mike explained, is the grant. If there is a tax increment grant, it is going to be fixed for whatever period of time is set. So each year, so the amount of taxes that the municipality receives each year will increase. So the grant is fixed, but the municipalities, the tax that they get goes up a little bit each year, and then once once the grant is finished, whether it's 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, or whatever, the municipality has the benefit of getting the full taxes, whereas if the development didn't occur, you would be getting taxes at the blue line level.
So again, this really, I think, in a lot of ways explains a little bit of what Kathleen highlighted there, that the annual grant is equal to a percentage of the town property tax increase generated by the development. It's paid once all the work sites are complete. So this would apply to a number of grants. So a little bit about the structure of a grant and why do a grant. And I get maybe we're getting a bit granular, but I think it's an important point to make. The percentage and duration is based on a performance criteria that is met. And the amounts are yet to be finalized. I think we've had some conversations, both formally and informally, around what those amounts should be, what that should look like, and I want to highlight for council, there will absolutely be time for your input on that. We have not set targets. We did have a consultant provide us options for consideration, but of course, we've heard from all sides that we need to continue to look at those options, fine-tune those options, address some of the concerns on all sides with respect to those options. So that is the end of the formal part of the presentation. I am going to ask Kathleen, Matt, and Paul to make some comments, specifically in certain areas. Matt to speak a little bit on Prudhommes, Paul on the economic development portion of this, and the conversations that he and his colleagues around the region are having. And again, Kathleen to speak to, I think, highlighting some of the success and why we do CIPs and why we've done them here and how they've worked here. So whoever wants to start.
So I'll start and just talk a little bit about Prudhommes in general. I mean, I think it goes without saying the magnitude of that development and the cornerstone that it is for our town. It's really important that we, get it right and design something that's truly remarkable. And, we talk about all the groundwork we did when we developed the secondary plan, and we did develop a lot of policies in that plan that, the end is to achieve exactly that. But inherent in any kind of high-level plan policies, official plan policies, secondary plan policies is there's always an element of flexibility built in. You can't be too prescriptive in those types of policy documents. You have to provide room for flexibility. And what these CIPs really do, especially as it relates to Prudhommes, is it really allows us to drill down one step further and get a little more prescriptive. That we can get down into the details of what we need on that site, especially when it pertains to something. I'll use the example that Mike mentioned about stormwater management. That's a critical piece here. And, there's a lot of benefits to incentivizing different and innovative types of stormwater management in terms of low impact development that will have spin-offs in that area. I mean, first of all, you maximize land use when you're implementing low impact development like that. You don't have to dedicate a big, huge block to some type of big facility that's going to, serve the whole site. There's also, it is an upfront investment, but it could also lead to advantages down the line. I mean, now you're attenuating stormwater in a much different way on a site-specific basis, through things like permeable pavers, through bioswales. All these things could lead in the future, to reduced maintenance costs. These things tend to function well. They tend to take care of themselves for a longer period of time. They're more sustainable. So that adds value to the development as well. And it being such a cornerstone of the community, it really provides a good centerpiece for these types of things moving forward so that we can, it even goes beyond Prudhommes. This could be encouraged elsewhere as well. So the importance here when it comes to Prudhommes is we're trying to achieve that upper echelon of that flexibility that we set forth in the secondary plan policies, and even going beyond that to try to really come up with a development that's above and beyond hopefully any other that we've seen in the waterfronts in southern Ontario and beyond. So those are my comments for sure.
Thank you, Mike, and to council tonight. And as Mike had Kathleen had clearly laid out there's a lot of benefits of community improvement plans. So I wrote down some remarks that I'm going to look at from an economic development perspective, and I look forward to some questions at the end. So from an economic development perspective, CIPs are an important public policy tool that can be used to help grow our local economy. While not the only tool, CIPs are a proven method of attracting investment, adding jobs, and creating economic growth. It is key to remember that our CIPs are about adding both jobs and people to our community. With population growth comes more value-added businesses, services, and activities. The result is increased business, employment, and entertainment opportunities, which are hallmarks of a vibrant community. With a vibrant community, private investment increases, leading to a greater tax contributions, as Mike and Kathleen clearly laid out. Regarding ROI on incentive programs, beyond an immediate ROI when it comes to increased property assessment values, which in turn increases tax revenues, as was shown, there's a community benefit of CIPs, such as desirable public amenities that can be in the form of affordable housing, public open spaces, better urban design, and streetscape improvements. That is why a lot of economic development professionals use the term societal return on investment, so SROI, as there's an increased social benefit to incentive programs. So anecdotally, let me tell you, when a lot of potential residential developers or business business developers, when they do call, they always ask, tell us about the community. What are the benefits of investing in the community? And they also ask, well, it's not the first question, what are some of the incentive programs that the community has? So as I stated at the start, it's not the only tool that economic development officers have when it comes to attractive investment, but it is a key one that people look for. So I look forward to some questions.
Okay, so to build on everybody's comments, so as was noted in some of the slides, we've had some CIPs around for a while. I would say that when we first started looking at CIPs, there used to be programs that the province put out. They were called Main Street programs. So the focus initially was, we had a lot of buildings downtown, and it would be really nice if we can get them to fix up their facades, you know, occupy some of the empty buildings. So I would say back when we first started doing CIPs, when the first one was approved in 2001, that was really the focus, is to kind of, you know, get some of the buildings fixed up and maybe some new buildings going ahead. And then that kind of evolved over time with our mixed-use CIP. Then the focus was, well, not only do we want buildings fixed up, but we also, you know, there's really a lack of housing choices in the community. There's lots of singles, there's townhouses, semis, but there really aren't things like apartments, because nobody had been building apartments for a long time. And as well, it's when you have apartments, it's also good to have mixed use, because then you've got, you know, people using the commercial. So the next CIP, its focus was more on how do we get more apartments in our communities so that young people have a place to buy a home, or a senior who wants to downsize may want to live in the community. They don't want to have to move to St. Catharines or maybe Hamilton. They want to stay in the community, but they don't buy a bigger house. So that was sort of the main reason for doing the mixed-use CIP. And then now we have the rural and industrial area CIP, and one of the focuses on that is how do we grow our agricultural community. So as you can see, our CIPs have evolved. I think that they will continue to evolve. Even with some of our existing CIPs, the criteria are not that strict. So I think over time, there is going to be a need to update those CIPs to, you know, have it more in line with some of our green infrastructure. Not just because you're in a CIP, you automatically get a grant, but throwing some more criteria to make it, you know, so that we can sort of move the bar. I think the other thing that was mentioned with CIPs is with our urban design guidelines and things like the building code, we can get minimum, but that's all we can get. So what the CIPs actually do is they actually encourage the developers to actually do more with their projects. So instead of building the basic building, and we might get a development such as, I don't want to pick on Grimsby, but you know, you get a development like Casablanca and Grimsby, whereas I think with CIP, you know, you can, if you have some incentives, you can get them to put in more green infrastructure, make the buildings look a little bit better, because our urban design guidelines, they're guidelines, whereas if you do the CIPs, there's more of an incentive for the developer to do that. The other thing to keep in mind too is with our mixed-use CIP, although we do have 2 current projects that are under construction right now, so they don't show up in any of the tables because they're not yet completed. There's the Centerville project, which is right behind Krabby Joe's, so that is a mixed-use project, and it's also going to have some affordable ownership housing. And then the second project that is under construction that probably won't be completed for a couple years will also have some affordable housing. So those 2 projects alone, they don't yet show up in our statistics, but there will definitely be a return on investment based on some of the preliminary numbers that developers have provided to us as what it's going to cost them to build the building. But that's really not the only issue. I think with those 2 developments, the one is, right downtown, so there's going to be more people living in close proximity to downtown, which will help, you have spin-off effects to the businesses. But the other, I think, most important thing is it's going to provide more housing choice.
So through you, Mr. Chair, that does complete, I think, staff's formal part of the presentation. I think we're definitely open to council's questions, your inquiries, any comments you may have, guidance that you may want to provide. Definitely, this is a workshop format, so again, very iterative, but through you, Chair, we are open to council questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. CEO and the staff for providing that presentation. We only have one member in the queue so far, so I'm going to call on Councillor Pachariva to start.
Thank you, Chair Russell. And thank you very much, staff, for this presentation. And in no ways sleight of hand or whatever I want to say. I really wish we would have had this presentation back in December. Councillor Timmers made a comment the other night that she's visual. This, I think, lays out emphatically what we're trying to achieve. It shows what the building standard presently would get us, and it gets us to where we want to be. The project is transformational. Mr. Bruder had mentioned that, and we need to get it right. I simply look at the Fleming Center. We wanted permeable pavement. We wanted a green roof. We wanted solar panels. We didn't achieve any of those. Now, at that time, we had a different management group, and the whole goal was getting under budget, and we left money on the table. But if we expect private developers to come to the table, we need to meet them in some way, shape, or form, because we demonstrated that we couldn't do it ourselves on our own. You look at the chart on the CIP activity. So really, we've given up 129,000 over 3.6 million. So it's only a 3% investment. So a 3% investment to get where you want to be, I think is fantastic. I myself am really going to hold staff's feet to the fire, because I want to see this, and you said this, Mr. Karkopoulos, working across the entire municipality. So I'm not only going to hold staff's feet to the fire, I'm also going to hold my fellow councillors' feet to the fire. Given an opportunity to do this, you better put up or shut up. Okay? There's opportunities to move the municipality along if we want to talk about climatic change, if we want to talk about the green environment. You know what? It's all very nice and well written on a piece of paper. But unless you do it, it's just words on a page. I'm really intrigued about the affordable housing comment. Councillor Rinchima and the task force is working forward to that. If that can get us to where we need to be, then I think that more than pays for it. My only question, Chair Russell, I know I've got 3, but I'm just going to ask 1 at this point. So I'm a little, and again, maybe it's the chart on the taxes generated. So page 42. So the development's going to generate more than $400,000 of property tax, or is that just property tax residential?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chairman, this is just an example.
Okay, okay.
We actually did look at some potential numbers, but, I mean, they're very rough. And the potential taxes that would be generated with this development is way, way higher than this graph.
No, exactly. It's, and again, and this is what happens, and I appreciate, I get the fact, and I think what we're trying to show in this diagram is that it's finite. Doesn't go on forever.
Yes.
It's a given period, so I get that. So I think, too, that it would help waylay reservations. And though they're preliminary, give us those numbers. Because again, it's going to show, so 3%, 2% on millions. And right now, I mean, the key is it's generating next to nothing. So a 3% investment in a next to nothing is going to give you astronomical returns. And again, I used this line a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to use it again today. So you have a chance to be a visionary. So adopting a Prudhommes CIP, you can get what we can get what we need. We can get truly what we want, and I don't want to compare us to Grimsby, but you can see what has happened down there at Casablanca, the haphazardness, the reaching out to the community and asking them what they want, and doing the charrettes and doing the public meetings. We've done all that. So now this is the final step in getting us over the finish line. Thank you, Chair Russell.
Thank you, Vice Chair Pachariva. Again, that was very good commentary. The one big thing I took of that as well was your support for green initiatives and climate change. So I'm also assuming that also includes your support of the single ban use of plastics down the road. Touche. We do have Councillor Mickwick up next, but for now we have Mayor Easton to start because she was in the queue prior.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, let me say that I spent a lot of time on this, and it seemed that today at the region, quite a bit of what we talked about in planning today fit right into this. So first I have a question, however, and it goes to the chart on page 42. What is a TIG? And if I could have an explanation, Mr. Chairman, about what happens, what's going on in the 3 to 4 years from approval of the TIG to the first payment?
Okay, so I think what the question is what happens before we get to the yellow, basically. So it depends on the nature of the development. So generally speaking, a person would submit an application for a grant. They would also go through site plan approval at the same time because their grant is going to be tied to, what they're planning to build. So they have to build that. So if it's a fairly large scale development, it will generally be between the time they apply for the grant, they take out their building permit, people start occupying, and it gets reassessed. That could be anywhere from 2 to 3 years, maybe 4, it depends on the scale of the development.
Okay, so what you're describing is, I think, Mr. Chairman, I think what you're describing, Kathleen, is a substantial amount of control from the outset. This isn't a matter of we go along, we get certain approvals, and then the developer decides, oh, by the way, and maybe as part of that early process, maybe things aren't quite as ideal as we would like them to be. So am I assuming too much if I believe that there is greater control when you have that relationship right from the beginning?
So, I mean, I think Kathleen and I are both looking at each other saying, yes, I think this is a partnership. It is a relationship. This is about getting into a long-term conversation. The idea of an incentive, whether it be a TIG, whether it be any other sort of rebate, does not happen, I think, haphazardly. It doesn't happen after the fact. It starts to happen right now, that conversation in terms of the development of these. So there's absolutely, I think, control. And the only other comment I'd add in terms of that timeline, I mean, MPAC and that assessment of MPAC, also, there's a lag there.
Yeah.
And I think this accommodates for that lag.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I was looking for, I think the presentations have been really very good, but I also needed to validate it against something else, something from outside of here and something that, that maybe involved different people. So today at planning, we were talking about the official plan at the region. And you may know that annually there's a group that goes around and interviews businesses. And one of the, this is the 4th year now, and one of the questions that is asked is, how can Niagara Region support your business? This was 2019. And so they interviewed 1,642 businesses, representatives. They evolved out of that 15 themes. And from that, and this report, I went through and I was able to identify of the 1,642 commenters, 956 commented on things that we're talking about in this CIP. So these people are from all over the region. And they said things like this: 281, or 16%, said that business exposure was extremely important. So we've heard on a number of occasions about branding of the community. What pulls people into the community? What does the community look like? How can I, what's going to happen if I establish my business here? What will it be like for my family? 12%, or 207, believed that skills and a labor force were very important. And we've heard that over and over. When you have the right looking community, when you have good, strong businesses in the community, when you have information on the establishment and the retention of businesses, that is worth an investment for sure. Beautification infrastructure, 11%, or 188 people. Incentives and grants were important to businesses. 128 said yes, or 8%. And then there were issues of health and safety, but there was also, that was 93 people, there were 59 people that talked about the development processes and our land use and our zoning and all of the elements that get involved in there. So I think if you look at something that isn't maybe 100% a match, but has a good number of people that were included, you can't say that we're off on a rail over here by ourselves, that we're operating outside the realm of anything reasonable. We also talked today about secondary plans and the kind of local control that you get from them. I really believe that Lincoln does this better than many other communities. The improved use of land is really important to us, but we also heard today that lower maintenance costs, maybe simpler technology is the way to go. We don't really speak about it that way, but bioswales certainly are simple technology, semi-permeable pavers, those kinds of things. So I even drew a little chart just to revalidate it again. I put it into a triangle to see on one side, what does the developer get out of this? What do the citizens get out of it? And what did the municipality get out of it? And it's a very good match, and you know, I'm very, very comfortable with what I'm hearing. The one other question that I have, Mr. Chairman, is about community benefits, the community benefits plans that are coming down from the province, and whether or not we should be looking at those as also a revenue stream to help counterbalance. So if you have development going on when you want it, and you can develop that community benefit plan in a way that rewards the town from having that development happen when you want it to, does that offset some of the cost? Do we have any sense of that at all?
So what is happening at the provincial level is so what's happening at the provincial level is municipalities all have development charges by law. So every time a builder takes out a permit for a dwelling unit, they pay a development charge. So within that development charge, there are things such as what they call soft services. And those are the costs that the municipality collects for things like recreation, trails, libraries, those kinds of what they call soft services. So what the province is doing is they're mandating us to go through a process that not only removes those soft services from our development charges and puts it in a separate bylaw, but we also at the same time also have to look at how we're addressing parkland dedication and also parkland dedication and the bonusing provisions. So under the current Planning Act, if the maximum height in the zoning bylaw was X and they wanted to build up to Y, the municipality could assess that value and get some sort of benefit, whether it's more parkland or I don't know, some public art or some affordable housing. So what we actually have to do is take the bonusing provisions, the cash in lieu and parkland provisions, and the soft services out of our development charges and create a new bylaw that's referred to as a community benefits bylaw. So it's going to be very similar to when we collect development charges. It's just the development charges will be your hard services. The community benefits will be your soft services, so all of those will also both be collected at the building permit stage.
Okay.
So in a sense, yes, we'll still be getting revenue from those sources as well.
Okay, and some of those.
Madam Mayor, just a second. Point of order. You're at 3 questions, a long 3 questions. Is this
Okay,
a
thank
comment or a?
No, I just, it would be a comment. I don't have any other questions. I just wanted to ensure that with the Prudhommes development, that the soft services opportunity, the community benefits opportunity would be another benefit for us overall in terms of the counterbalance between the revenue collection that we would be getting. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're very good.
You're welcome to go back in the queue. Councillor Miklick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kirkopoulos and staff for the presentation. Just CIPs, TIGs, back in December, we were told that we were dealing with a blank slate. Convince me, what's unique about this project? That it's a blank slate. Traditionally speaking, TIGs, CIPs are used to revitalize, rejuvenate, promote, encourage. Would development not occur here if we would not be having these CIPs or TIGs in place? Is it safe to say that we would struggle to see development on this lakefront property?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. I mean, would we struggle? My answer is probably no. The speed at which, though, we would see a development happen is what I think is of the utmost concern. So with speed of seeing a development happen, whether it was happening now or happening 5 or 10 years from now, you could probably say, had we put no incentives in place, had we done no marketing, a lot of the developments that you currently see may have happened, may not have happened. I think, as you know, Councillor, from your private sector experience, and a number of councillors know, when a developer or any business interest is looking at any development, they have a pro forma, which is really a look at what the costs would be, what the potential revenues would be, and then they often take these documents to the bank. I've learned a lot more about this in talking to the Niagara home builders so that I could get educated on it and come back and talk to council more. There is a set criteria that the bank expects from any development. It's typically in that 7 to 10% range. Without that, they're not financing a development. So what goes into the creation of that development are a number of factors. I would say that development sometimes is delayed. We're seeing development happen in our community, but a number of the projects where you're seeing things happen, whether it be, and albeit slow, at the top of Ontario Street, they are realizing the benefits of a community improvement plan. Green Lane, they are benefiting from the benefits of a community improvement plan. We have a number of projects and a number of redevelopments happening in the community, of which all are benefiting from that. It does go into the calculation. It does go into how do I look at what I'm putting in as the private sector builder or developer and what I'm getting out of it. So I think my answer to you is, would you see it happen? You'd probably see it happen. Would you see it happen as quickly as it's happening? Would we get the taxes that they're going to be generated from it happening now versus 5 years from now or 10 years from now? I don't believe so. I know staff is chomping to answer the question behind me as well.
I just wanted to add, just going back to what I was saying earlier too, it's not necessarily, it's not about, making the development happen. The development, yeah, we could argue, yeah, it's a prime piece of real estate. It's going to happen. But it's about achieving that extra excellence in design. Green Lane was used as an example. They've been able to include a couple of things, in part due to some of the CIP grants that they got, one being geothermal heating there, very beneficial, a great example of sustainable infrastructure. The other being incorporating some affordable housing in there that we talked about. I mean, that's affordable housing in terms of the threshold which is put forth for the region. But that's, I think, what we're talking about here is achieving those types of benefits in the development.
Okay, and if I may, the reason why I asked that question is because in this letter that I've got here from the Niagara Home Builders Association, it says here, Ontario have used CIPs to encourage development in key strategic areas that otherwise would not have developed and remained underutilized in the market context. That's why I bring that point up. The other thing is, there's a process with regards to the CIP implementation, the design of it, the tools of it. It includes a public consultation. Have we consulted with the public as far as what their thoughts are with regards to a CIP program for Prudhommes?
So
And perhaps we're not at that point yet, I'm not sure.
So through you, Mr. Chair, Kathleen can talk about the PIC that we did have with respect to the Prudhommes CIP. We are in that part of the process. We will always hear from residents. You're likely recalling that we had a media article that was incorrect, and it generated a lot of information and a lot of engagement with both members of council, senior staff, and the media. And I think those are just the natures of how we try to capture all sorts of engagement. But we have had a formal process, and Kathleen probably has the date much more readily available than I do.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I don't have the date at the top of my head, sorry, but I think actually we need to back up a bit. We did a Prudhomme secondary plan. We had an awful lot of input from the public. So there's very high expectations out there from the people who currently live in that community. So we also did initially we've done a visioning exercise, and we've also done some work with the stakeholders to look at, if we were to do a CIP, what kind of incentives are you looking at? So at this point, we're trying to get to the point where we narrow down, if we do a CIP, what those incentives are going to be. The next step in the process is we have to do a draft CIP with the incentives. We have to take it through we have to get public input into it. So it's not just the public at large, but it's also anybody, any other stakeholders involved in the process. That all has to be brought back to committee before the plan's approved. So there still is we're not at the end of the process. We're sort of in the middle of the process. We still have to do much more consultation.
If I may, one more question, and respecting my fellow councilors, just that'll be my third, right?
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we need these CIPs or TIGs, or can we? I like what Councillor Pachariva is saying. Permeable pavements, silver cells, and trees on the streets, and all of that. That's fantastic. Can we not control that through site plan control? Can we not encourage that through site plan control? Is there other ways of leveraging developers to produce our vision other than offering incentives and TIGs, CIPs?
Mr. Chairman, so the short answer is no. So we, within our official plan, as the Prudhommes secondary plan is part of the official plan, there's very, very detailed urban design guidelines. Those are design guidelines. We don't have, we have no mechanism to force a developer to do low-impact development. So we don't have those tools to get the development from A quality to maybe B, improve the quality, improve the look, improve the feel, add some green infrastructure. We don't have the tools in place to do that. The only way that we can do that is through CIPs to get them to up what we want them to do in the area. So there's no mechanism in place. Even with site plan control, you can only dictate so much. I mean, yes, you can get them to plant trees, but you can't get them to do the permanent pavers. They'll just put in asphalt. You can get them to plant trees, but trees will grow much better if you've got, particularly in boulevard areas where you've got silvocells in very, very tight spaces. So the CIPs give us, it's another tool in the toolbox to try and get development moving in the direction that everybody would like to see.
Okay, and I ask that because Mayor Easton often asks for conceptual drawings, 3D drawings. She wants to see an image of what, and it seems to influence decisions as far as what we see in a development or what we appear to see or what we hope to see. So that's the reason why I ask that particular question. And yeah, there was something else.
You are out of questions, Councilor McLeod.
It was a follow-up. It was a follow-up.
You are more than welcome to re-enter the queue. I welcome any further commentary. But, Councilor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation tonight. And, I think it does answer the questions that we had back in December about what are we getting if we don't have CIPs, and what are we getting if we do have CIPs. And I think, I look at it as an investment in making Prudhommes that destination that we started talking about back in 2016 when we started the secondary plan. And I think the other point, and it's maybe a question, maybe confirmation, that the revenue that's being used for this investment is coming directly out of the Prudhommes properties. Is that the case?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So right now, within the Prudhommes area, all those properties are paying X in taxes. So with a tax increment grant, a building gets built on the property, there's going to be an increase in taxes. So it's actually the redevelopment of that property that's generating the taxes, and that's what's going to pay the TIG grant.
Right, so
it is the Prudhommes property.
It's not coming from the rest of the community,
No, it'll come
contributing to-
from
okay.
the development that creates the
Right,
tax
right.
assessment.
So I think that's an important point, that we're taking new tax revenue that's coming from the development and reinvesting it back into the development. I'm going to take in a little bit different direction. I understand this is a workshop, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but I just want to ask the question about the revenue that we're looking at generating. And if we look at roughly $180,000 a year over the course of 7 years, I think we're $1.2 million or something like that. And my question is, what will that get us? $1.2 million, and again, if I'm getting too far into it, the weeds tell me so, but I'm thinking more, Mr. Chair, I'm thinking more about, there's a lot of things that were shown tonight that are wonderful projects or wonderful enhancements to the property. $1.2 million is gonna get eaten up very quickly building a underground parking lot is gonna be a whole lot more than $1.2 million. So if the question I have is, are we moving the needle here at all? And how do we arrive at a number that does get us the movement by the developer to build this destination that we're looking for?
Just a point of clarification, that's just a fictitious example. It's not Prudhommes related. So the actual amount of the TIG would be dramatically higher than that, which we've been asking for, we haven't received yet.
So through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct, Councillor. So this is just an example. I can tell you the scope at which we're looking, and I think, and I only say it's premature to share that, and I'm not saying that because we've got representatives of the development group here. Does need to be I think, a back and forth. There needs to be council approval and all these. But, you know, when you're talking about the total amount of grants versus the taxes we receive, I mean, we laid out a scenario simply on just the high-rise portion of this, and you could be looking at tens of millions of dollars in taxes received and incentives that are probably half of that.
So
so-
the higher level question is, we feel that the incentives will get us that enhanced look in parking, in landscaping, in environmental, quite a number of examples of investment.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, that is our hope. I mean, of course, it's going to be working with council and working with the development group to negotiate what those incentives are, what the amount of those incentives are, and what the criteria that need to be met. And that still hasn't occurred yet. And so that is the conversations that I think need to ensue coming out of here, coming out of some of the council direction. But if we're talking the numbers that we think, we also need to work and make sure that the criteria are achievable and provide the level of incentive that we want, and at the same time, get us the desired end result.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We have Councillor, you have to take off your mic, Councillor McPherson. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Russell.
Wait, there we
I
go.
think Councillor McPherson actually kind of went exactly where I was thinking, is where, I think there's misconception out there of where the money's coming from. So the money is coming from the development itself. We are not pulling money from the taxpayers or from our reserves. It's fully covered by the development itself.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think, to Councillor Timmers, that's absolutely correct, Councillor. I think in any of the suite of incentives that, we would look at, of course, it is based on that development, and the monies either we recoup from that development or decrease collection of. So however you look at rebates, however you look at any of these, it is really based on that premise. It is not based on taking from one area and giving to another area.
Okay. And as far as, I look at it this way, the development is, without the CIP, it's bare minimum. The building code is bare minimum. So if you look at it as if you're building your own house, are you gonna put in standard flooring and standard windows and counters? Are you gonna do some upgrades? So you put in better quality things. And that's how I look at the CIP for this development, is getting those quality pieces like the energy saving, the different higher quality finishes and look and feel. And so I don't really have any other questions. I'm absolutely support this. I just want to know how we're going to figure out what percentage and where the numbers go. That's the only thing that's kind of in my mind. So I know that'll be coming.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I mean, I think, I heard behind my right shoulder, that's the tricky part, and I think that's probably the answer. It will be a very, I think, dynamic, fluid conversation by, the collective us, staff back to council, staff working with, again, the development group in this particular location, like we would in any particular location.
And also just further to Councillor McPherson, what is the level? Like, how much do we have to put in to get, this level? Or where do we come in to get some of the things that we've seen and talked about? So those are my questions moving forward. But we're halfway through. We've got a long way to go. So there'll be a lot more discussion, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Timmers. Councillor Reimer.
Russell, thank you to the staff It's a great report. A lot of good information that we can share with people who have been asking questions. So thank you very much for that. Just to follow up and related in a way to Councilor McPherson's comments, how do we? I'll come back to what the councillor brought up. How do we take control of Prudhommes? So we have different phases of construction, and as each one is completed, are we going to assume responsibility of phase one, utilities, roads, and everything else, and then phase two? Or are we waiting to the end until we take control of everything, or we're responsible for everything?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councilor Reimer's question, it'll be in phases, as the way you described the first example. I mean, I think there's some overarching policy, some overarching conversations about the entire site, and that's how some of the conversations at this particular phase and this particular point in time are going to happen. But in terms of acceptance of roads, acceptance of those elements of it, it'll be done in phases.
And so if a phase overlaps, so phase two, let's say, isn't finished, are they allowed to progress to phase three? So those won't be independent on each other, and the monies that's deposited for jobs to be completed are going to run independent of phases. So if there's money put down on a building that we have a TIG program on, that's going to run separately. That won't be interfered with any other phase completion. It's going to remain simple for that building.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, so with a lot of, like, right now, there's a draft plan of subdivision on the property. It's a large development, so we do expect it to be developed in phases. And the developer actually has put forward a preliminary phasing plan. What will happen is the developer, will develop the property in blocks. And let's say phase two, for example, has a commercial block. So on that particular block, they may apply for a community improvement plan grant. So that would actually go with that particular block of property. It's not really tied to the overall subdivision. So when they develop that block to get their CIPs, their approval, they're going to have to submit a site plan, show what it's going to look like. They're going to have to build in accordance with their site plan application, incorporate all of the things in order to get their grants, and then once it's done, it's evaluated to make sure that they comply. So each of those blocks will probably be looked at on their own. It's not really tied to how the overall subdivision proceeds.
Okay, so some of these green technologies that we've been talking about would also span over different phases, though, right? So how are we going to address or ensure that?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if I could just provide some, maybe some clarification, so let me know, Councillor, if I help or hinder the explanation. I think to your previous question around does it stay with the particular property or the particular type of development, I think as we look at our suite of community improvement plans, there will be, for example, one specific to the high-rise residential. There will be one specific to the commercial, mixed-use, employment land. So they will be very individual, and the criteria in order to meet those particular incentives will be different for each of those particular elements of the project. So in a lot of ways, it will remain with the actual node or the element of that particular project that does qualify. Will there be some overlap? Some of the green infrastructure, I think there's some principles that we're going to want to adopt across the entire development. Silva cells is a good example in some of that green infrastructure. If that is where we move forward, and those are the plans to move forward with, that is going to be something that's integrated across the site, notwithstanding the phases that are there.
Okay. One comment, if I may, too, Chair Russell. Just in the report here, it states about green technology. Green technology does cost more in general. So these grants, this TIG format we have, I think is a good insurance that we find some green technology in this project and that it gets finished. I think the key is Councillor Mikulik was asking about it getting started. I don't think that's an issue. Getting it finished will be could be a worse problem. So once it gets started, it's such a big, it's not like a little subdivision, that we've been used to around here. This is a pretty big project. And I would encourage as staff has already mentioned, to the percentage of TIG refunding that we do should be a pretty fluid number, because those technologies are going to be, they might be different for every phase that we have. So I wouldn't want to miss out on an opportunity to have something for one phase because of the, you know, the cost might be relatively different in another one. So just that we're always in contact with the developer and work together to get this thing done right. Thank you, Chair Russell.
Thank you, Chair. And if I may just quickly, I just want to highlight that piece, and it is a key piece when you talk about finishing. I mean, I don't want to lose focus on the fact that we're talking about some employment and commercial units at Prudhommes, and you've heard me say up here before that we need some more of that inventory in our community. So there's a potential of a few hundred jobs here that we want to make sure happens, and so I don't want to lose that in our discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Reimer. We have Councillor Brunet next.
Thank you, Chair Russell. So I appreciate the presentation. I do agree with the comments that have been made, that if possibly we had this presentation, we wouldn't have had the maybe misunderstanding and conversation we had at the December meeting, but we can't go back. So I guess, and I certainly appreciate, you know, all the definitions and all the input from the staff. And when I look at what Mr. Bruder said when he was at the microphone, that the secondary plan gives us an element of flexibility, and that the CIP allows us to drill down, get more prescriptive, and in essence give us what we want. So I want to focus on that for a minute. We have talked for, as Councillor McPherson mentioned, since 2016 through all our different PICs that we've engaged with the people of Victoria Shores and the community about what we think we want. And I've heard over and over and over again about sustainability and green roofs and impermeable concrete, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All those things come with a big cost. And I guess where I'm really struggling is, you know, as a council and as staff, I could be wrong, but I don't think any of us have been ever involved in a project of this magnitude. A waterfront development, 87 acres, you know, one of the crown jewels of property between, you know, Cornwall to Buffalo. You know, we keep saying we only get one chance to do this right. We keep talking about making sure we're going to have all these things that are going to make it an experience for people to come to. And I get it, and I embrace that. I guess, through you, Mr. Chair, I guess I'm just wondering at what point, and I sent some emails to the CAO over the last couple of days, you know, asking if there was going to be people presenting today above and beyond staff. And I appreciate the letters that we received from the home builders and from Mr. Giffen. I appreciate that. But I believe, or at least I feel, that we need to, and no disrespect to the developers sitting in the audience, FBH and IBI, that are going to guide us through this, but you know, at the end of the day, we keep saying we think we know what we want, but I don't know if we do, or what that looks like, or what it's going to cost. So at some point, through you, Mr. Chair, to the CAO, I guess, I'm just hoping that we can engage someone that has been involved in a project, you know, that involves waterfront development, that involves trails, that involves underground parking. You know, we keep making references to what we think we want. We say we don't want what Grimsby wants. You know, quite honestly, I go down to Casablanca. There's a lot of things that I do like. So, you know, I guess I'm just asking a question that I feel at some point, because when we talk about all these things that we continue to talk about, you know, electric charging stations, waterfront, public art, affordable housing, soil cell interaction, underground parking, et cetera, et cetera. Even stormwater management, we've never done this before. The CIPs are critical. I embrace these. I think they're going to be critical to making sure, as Councillor Reimer suggested, that, you know, this property's been sitting vacant for a long, long time. And we're not getting any money from it, and we can start this project, but what's this project going to look like when we're done? And I want to embrace this, but at some point, I think we need some involvement from someone you know, who is going to guide us beyond with what I feel we've got right now with IBI and FBH, and I certainly welcome any comment through the CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So definitely I agree with many of the comments that Councillor Brunet has made in terms of always ensuring that we are informed and best informed as possible. I think it's never, it never hurts us to engage with individuals that have done waterfront developments either in other municipalities. We're always looking at best practices. You'll recall that during the initial design phase, we engaged both WSP, that's done a lot of waterfront developments, at least from that that infancy stage. We've engaged, you know, planners who had worked on waterfront developments in a number of other areas. Throughout the process, I think that is absolutely a key element of things that we should be doing, and I want to give the councillor confidence that we'll continue to look at best practices. We'll bring in people to talk to us. It will constantly be a process that we're both going out to and talking with people and also bringing back to council and hearing from you. I think there's no better ability for us to learn than to talk to others. A number of us have been involved, I think, in a lot of developments and a lot of communities. Maybe nothing to this level and nothing to this scope, but I think absolutely we can continue to become informed. And so I want to give the councillor some level of confidence or comfort in his comments that we will continue to engage. We will be informed. We will continue to liaise with representatives at Victoria Shores. I know the councillor mentioned that early on. And we have a vision and a goal, and I think what council expects from us is how we're going to bring that vision to reality. So we're also reaching out to experts both in the landscaping field, in the sustainability and environmental field, looking at how do silva cells work, looking at data. I've got you know, lengthy documents that I want to hand out to council that speak to green infrastructure, the successes and pitfalls of green infrastructure, so that we can learn what works, what doesn't work, and how do we make any of the developments we do world-class. Because again, it doesn't matter if you're in Niagara, Philadelphia, New York, all the examples we use, we want a world-class waterfront development that people look at and say, when they're driving to Niagara Falls or when they're coming here to experience the tourism that they do from Toronto or other areas, that, wow, look at that development, look what they've done there. And so, again, I want to assure Councillor Brunet that if that expertise is needed, we will be seeking that expertise.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Seo. I know Madam Mayor and Councillor Miklik would like to go around the horn again, and there may be others providing commentary, but I just wanted to throw my hat in the ring for some thoughts. Okay. The first question I have, and again, I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but it is what it is. The commentary, or at least the presentation, I'm trying to stay away from Prudhommes and keep it kind of holistic, but it keeps on getting back to Prudhommes itself. It looks like the majority of the investment would be in what Councillor Timmers has phrased upgrades. So not necessarily core building activities, but it looks like upgrades, enhancements to what is already going to be developed. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, or to you, Mr. Chair, I think it's both. I think some of it is upgrades, absolutely, and you've heard us talk about here's what we're getting based on the building code and here's what we'd like to get. But I would say where we're going to see us get things that we may not have gotten at all, not just an upgrade, is really on the environmental side, the sustainability side, the green infrastructure side. I think if you look at that particular site, it's constrained, and so if we were to simply do a stormwater management pond, which I guess what you're saying is basic, that stormwater management pond starts to eat away at our park, starts to eat away at the other elements, and they become much more financially unfeasible to do. And so I would say it's a bit of both. We are going to get a better product, you're right, versus the base, but some of it is necessary.
Okay. Well, and the reason I asked that question, again, to the CAO and maybe to the staff at the podium, is there any consideration or thought that if this CIP is not provided, this development will not go through?
To you, Mr. Chair, is there any consideration to that notion? I mean, I think that's always a possibility. That's always in the back of my mind, in that I think early on in the process, even when we had the design charrettes and we were talking about what was the ideal in this location and what we could expect, we've always talked about how do we work together in partnership to create the type of location, environment, and destination we want. So is it in the back of my head? Is it a concern? Absolutely. I hear staff behind me saying, yeah, that is a possibility that it doesn't go forward. That doesn't mean that it'll never go forward. It just means it doesn't go forward maybe right now in this fashion in the way we want it. I think there's always just naturally that inherent risk on here's what we want, here's our desired end goal, here's what we have, and how do we bridge going from A to B or A to C in this particular case. And so I think it's a consideration. Is it a huge concern for me at this particular point in time? No, because I think, you know, what staff have put before council, I think is a balanced suite of approaches. And again, I think where we can have a conversation with council, and one of the last comments on the slide is, you know, speaks to, we hear council's concern around maybe how much the incentive is. So let's look at that. Let's look at that particular piece and figure out what is that balance that we need to take.
Thank you, Mr. Seo. The reason I asked that question, and it goes to the point of where the funding comes from, and again, the idea that, well, this funding is going to be coming directly from this project, so technically it's self-sufficient or self-sustained, whatever terminology you want to use. And Councillor McPherson, Councillor Timmers both iterated that. I don't feel that way. I feel that any dollar that we spend belongs to the resident, whether it's coming through this, whether it's coming through our normal property assessment taxes, it's coming through services that we're selling at Town Hall. And to me, it doesn't necessarily matter what our spend is on it, as long as we can rationalize back to our residents what the return on that is. So, and I was asked coming into the meeting, like, what do you think that range should be? And honestly, you know what, it really doesn't matter to what if it's 20%, 60%, 80%, 90%, I don't care. As long as we can have that conversation with the resident that's struggling to pay her bills, or the senior that's been in town for 60 years and is slowly being pushed out of why this money is being diverted from them to this. And that's, to me, the most important thing that can't get lost in this entire thing. And again, to use Councillor Timmer's analogy, this is like upgrading your house, and when you want to try to get the best things in, yes, but what really this is you're upgrading your house trying to get those best things in, but you're having the neighborhood pay for it. And we need to create that justification of why. And that's where I think we need to bore out what the numbers are going to be. So I think there are going to be some huge benefits. And I know Mr. Gianni had mentioned about that commercial aspect, and that is huge. And the job creation is very big. But to me, I want to see that package of what the spend is going to be and what we're going to get out of it as far as increase in taxes that we could collect, so that we can have those honest conversations with our residents to say, okay, this is exactly what you're going to get, and this is why this is a wise investment.
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. And I think pointing to what's just up on the slide here, I think we need to give you a real-time estimate of what this chart looks like in a particular scenario, and highlight for you what those numbers potentially look like once we get to that particular point. Because at the end of the day, following that yellow piece on the slide, that 7 years plus extrapolated over the next 20, 30 years, that's what you want to be able to show residents. Here's what we're going to collect. Here are the taxes. We were able to get this project started sooner. We were able to increase the value of the project itself, which means our percentage of tax apportionment is greater. So absolutely, we need to equip council so you can tell that story, so that it isn't simply we've got an interest, we've got an ability to help them out, and it seems that simplistic. It is a far more complex conversation and exercise that we're undertaking. So absolutely, Councillor.
Okay. Madam Mayor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I very much appreciate the comments that were made by Councillor Brunet in terms of where does that skill set come from? How do we, as a council, have confidence that the dimensions of what we have before us are all going to be achieved? And so I'm getting to the point where I'm prepared to be extremely blunt about this. And my bluntness goes like this. And I've had this conversation with the developer, so there's nothing new about it. We absolutely have to have the right builder. If we don't have the right builder, it doesn't matter what this plan is all about. It can be the most grandiose development. We could have had the greatest charrette success in Ontario, but if we don't have the right builder, somebody who is really interested in doing a great job, I mean a stupendous job, this will be a problem. So I think that we should accept the fact that there are times when we have plans on the board and they look pretty reasonable, and then you find yourself, as we did in this last year, in a real hole of disappointment because you look at it and you say to yourself, did we really approve that? And how did this happen? And now we have to look at this for the rest of our lives. So yesterday, I sent an email to the CAO and to the developer, and I described some characteristics, and after I listened to the conversation tonight, I realized that there's going to be lots of good ideas around this table. But we have to have a builder who is interested in not disappointing. They have to be prepared to do a really superb job, willing to plan the site and make sure that everything is as it should be. I mean, if you have to send a developer letters about muddy roads, there's something fundamentally wrong with the commitment that that person has made. And I could go on for some time here talking about respect to citizens and to the developer themselves. Do I want to see umpteen builders on this property? I do not. I want to see one. I want to see one builder that really understands what excellence looks like. And if we don't have that, I don't know who we're going to be talking to about this plan, because I doubt that some people would even understand what it means. And I am being very, very blunt. We have very professional staff here who put a lot of effort into this. Our CAO has put a lot of effort into it. But it all hangs on the fact that you have the right person in their building. So this isn't about who do you know. This is about who do you know that has a pedigree that's so long in terms of excellence that you never have to think twice. And so the question that Councillor Reimer asked about going from one phase to another and not having to worry about things getting done, about the quality of what's done over here and the quality of done over here, that can only be achieved by having one builder. And so all of these discussions have been very fluid. I think that word has been used a couple of times. It's very, very important. So I sent this off yesterday. I don't know whether the developer is going to be offended or not. It doesn't really matter to me at this point. I just know that all of our credibility hangs on having the right people on this property, and that is the long and the short of it. All of this we are going to figure out. We are absolutely going to figure this all out. We don't need to rush into it, but if we don't have the right person there to talk with, we don't have the right person to negotiate with, it's going to be very, very tough. And I don't want to have that conversation with people in the community. I've had that conversation all winter, and I don't ever want to have it again. And this is a very important piece of property, so it is appropriate that we talk about it. So that's my final comments.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the mayor's comments. So I made myself a couple notes. I've got a couple of things I do want to say to that. I think we've experienced in the past, relationships with developers that maybe haven't gone as seamless or as positive as we would have liked. And the mayor's highlighted some of those issues, whether it be dirty roads, whether it be any of those other things. I think, that's never a situation we want to deal with. Oftentimes, not as much as you, but often from you, I am on the receiving end of those emails relative to concerns that you have on development, timing, inclement weather, all the things that happen sometimes when you have a messy site. So absolutely, I think when you look at something the size and scope of a Prudhommes, we want to make sure all of those issues are addressed, all of those issues are discussed, and whoever the partner is of this development group, that we're all on the same page. I have had many conversations with Mr. Bertola, Francesco, as everyone knows, who's been in this council chamber. I'm confident that the developer wants to deliver the best possible product in this particular location. There are a number of conversations that have been had that need to continue to be had. I think a CIP that looks at the various elements that we've looked at helps us get there. And so I absolutely take the mayor's comments very seriously. And I appreciate the comment relative to the staff expertise you have. We do have a lot of staff here. We have a lot of great staff here that really feel passionate about this project. And where we need to supplement those staff on the various elements, we will. This project spans every single department, I would tell you, from Public Works and the conversations around stormwater management to finance. When we look at our community improvement plan to community services, to communications, I mean, go around the table, everybody's involved in this. Economic development, the three people you see behind me, the entire planning department, building, et cetera. We understand the scope of this project. We understand all eyes are on it. The community's comments on it, the community's desire to see it move forward, people outside of the community, the entire region that's looking at it, and even people outside of our region that have heard about the project. So I take the mayor's comments seriously, and they're duly noted, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. We do have Councillor Miklick in the queue, but if I may just have one quick comment because it relates to the mayor's comments. Do we have the ability to put conditions on the CIP that would be, for lack of a better word, giving us a little bit more authority and making sure that the execution is as we expect?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the simple answer is yes, by virtue of designing a CIP. A lot of those stipulations are very clearly laid out that do give the municipality a lot of, or a huge ability to have that type of conversation. So while we haven't designed the particular CIP, and again, that'll be a back and forth conversation with the development group and members of council, there are absolutely a lot of what I would call checkpoints and check marks that need to be checked before money flows in any fashion. Inspections, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. And again, I'm thinking more along the lines, again, I think these conversations, as you mentioned, will come to fruition down the road. But again, meeting dates for completion, quality of work, again, maybe having it aligned to having one developer throughout or having a reapproval process for if there is a sale or some sort of migration of responsibility between multiple parties. Anything like that where maybe we have the ability to reconsider our commitment to the project, if need be.
To you, Chair. All things that we'll look at when we develop the future CIP.
Okay. Councillor Miklick.
Thank you, Chair Russell.
Wait, whoa.
Just wanted to reiterate what you'd stated earlier with regards to the development paying it for itself through its taxes. When taxes are paid, it's for the betterment of the whole community, right? So I'm thinking that, you know, like if you're a business owner or a taxpayer and you want to produce a tax incentive grant for yourself, I mean, it doesn't better the community necessarily. Like, you would be paying those taxes that would benefit the community for the soft services as well. Anyway, for the development to be paying for itself is almost an unfair statement that the community's not benefiting until the project's completed. And that's just a quick comment I have with regards to that. I don't know if you want to chime in on.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think, Councillor, you want me to make a comment, so I will.
Feel free.
On this particular item. I think it goes back to one of Chair Russell's questions or inquiries to me and to us, and that is there a concern that it doesn't go forward? And I think my answer to that was yes. At some point, there is that concern. So while I understand your comments, Councillor, with respect to the whole, and anything that we generate in one area benefits the whole, and I completely feel that is true. Anything we do in any part of the community is for the betterment of the entire community. We increase the value in one area of town, that benefits the entire area of town. So I think that philosophy, that approach applies. But again, I hearken back to, I think, that comment, and that's probably how I'd answer your question. I don't necessarily think it's an unfair comment to be making. And while I have a slightly different view of that, I appreciate your comments, Councillor.
Well, that's pretty serious what you're saying, because we're talking about spending $7.5 million or so on this development. So should there be issues with the CIP program, then we may want to rethink whether or not we make that investment. If that's the case, if that's the direness of this concern that you've just brought forward.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, I don't want the councillor to interpret what I said as I believe we're in dire straits. I think my comment in answering Chair Russell's question was that I think if we don't look at a suite of supporting development in this particular area, we risk either delays, we risk timelines. But I don't go into anything, councillor, with the philosophy or the approach that we can't find a solution that I think works for council, that meets the community's desire and the community's target, and that addresses any of the issues in this particular area. And so we are making an investment as it relates to Jordan Road and the infrastructure that allows us to go forward, that allows us to do some of the other upgrades, the subsurface stuff that often isn't sexy but required for this to move forward. And so I would just caution council in not interpreting my comments as there's a dire strait or a dire concern that I have on it not going forward. But I think in my comments to the councillor around if we don't have a suite of ability or a suite of supports to make this the development we want to make it, could it be delayed? Could it not move forward right now? I mean, I suppose those are always risks, councillor, but I would not be recommending not moving forward with the capital investment that council has made.
Okay, and then, so here's some questions I have. So,
There's nobody in the queue, you go right ahead.
So, with this community improvement plan, TIG plan, when we do come up with a final version approved, is there a 20 days, my understanding there's a 20-day appeal process to which we would have to defend this plan or justify or explain it. Now, are we able to, or should we consult with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing prior to, have we been doing that to date?
Kathleen can give you a very thorough explanation of it, councillor. We have been, we completely understand the process relative to appeals and the legislation within municipal affairs and housing and the various acts. But Kathleen can give you the short but fulsome explanation.
I'll try and be short. So when you do a community improvement plan, it's treated the same way as an official plan amendment, same process. So there is a 20-day appeal period, but before we even get to that point, once a draft community improvement plan is ready and it has all the list of incentives, that we do have to provide a copy of that to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs for comment. So they actually do provide us comments on CIPs, and they've done that in the past.
Okay. And if I may, one more, backtracking a little bit to the whole TIG, the whole CIP, and when I look at those images and drawing, or the pictures of other municipalities and what looks good and what doesn't look good, I'm going to say, I think the market determines what developers build. I mean, if you're going to build an ugly dock, you're probably not going to market it to a higher end crowd. So I think that any developer that would go out of their way to build an ugly duck on this piece of property, I think would be rather foolish. I think that I'm not sure I'm buying that. And then with regards to, in the report as well, with regards to the affordable housing, the affordable housing piece and the high-rise residential TIG or CIP, how do we know that it's not just viewed like this affordable housing for first-time home buyers? It's going to actually be first-time home buyers and not just investors from Toronto looking to reassign or flip that affordable home or that affordable condo. How can we actually have people requiring affordable housing purchasing and living in these affordable housing subsidized, units.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. So I'll answer the ugly duck piece first. When it comes to, you're right, I mean, a developer's not gonna go out there, they're not gonna build something that's unsightly or, that wouldn't sell properly, but that's not really what we're talking about here. I don't think that's the case. There's an element here of enhanced design, and there's an element here of enhanced functionality too that would come along with encouraging those kind of, like I said before, upper echelons of design standards, development standards. So that's really the goal. It's not to avoid necessarily an ugly design. It's just to make the design that much more better than just maybe a median design or something that doesn't provide that level of functionality from a sustainability standpoint. So those are the things we're looking to achieve. And I know we talked about this a little bit in the Affordable Housing Task Force about affordable housing and how do you ensure, yeah, it's great, when the building first goes to market, yep, it's below the threshold and everybody's happy, but then what if a speculator or an investor jumps in and purchases it? And I think that's a valid comment, and I think that's something we definitely do need to consider as we move ahead with developing some of the criteria as well. So definitely a good comment that we need to be aware of.
And that's the point I have is I just don't want to pat ourselves on the back, offer affordable units, only to have them snapped up on day one by out-of-town speculators reassigning and ultimately profiting, and then eventually those units, those affordable units, become market priced units. Is the point I'm trying to make here.
I mean, through you, Mr. Chair, I think there's things that we can put in the agreement specifically as it relates to the affordable or housing affordability provision. I'm hearing the conversation happen behind me that's in agreement with that statement. So there are means testing. There's a number of things that can be put into those agreements. So I think as we get down that conversation, down that line, we can make sure that we are putting those types of things in agreements or encouraging those things to happen in agreements or mandating that those things happen in the relative agreements. Just a quick comment on your previous question, Councillor. We take the same process for all of our CIPs, the level of conversation we have with partners, looping in the province, getting that approval, and we've recently gone through that exercise around the industrial and rural CIP.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, the rest of the council, for entertaining me.
You're out. We do have Councillor Pachariva in, but I just want to make a comment prior. Again, I had similar concerns to Councillor Mikulik about the affordable housing. I heard you mention very early on that there was going to be potential workshop about affordable housing somewhere down the road, hopefully prior to the implementation of this plan. So I was going to reserve my thoughts, but they did align very well with what Councillor Mikulik was suggesting, and trying to avoid just creating a checkbox, more of a platitude for the public and council, and actually making it a real impact on people that are looking for those homes in that lower bracket. That notwithstanding, just a quick question, maybe, depending on your answer. Why are we, and again, this is just more of a building question, why are we incenting for high rise? I know why we want high rises, but why are we incenting for high rises?
So I think, so I'm going to let either Matt or Kathleen answer that question first, and then I have some comments to make on it as well, Councillor.
Okay, so one of the reasons why we want to incentivize density is because it will provide another form of housing. So if you look at our community, we have a lot of low, medium density housing. We don't have a lot of higher density developments such as apartments. So it's also to provide an alternative choice, provide affordable housing. So that's kind of one reason. The other reason is that in order to ensure that like the Main Street commercial and the other businesses become viable, you need a population mass. So you need a whole bunch of people in an area to support those businesses. So in order to do that, you have to up the density.
Yeah. And again, I do appreciate that, Director Dale. And I understand, again, the reason why we want high rises. To me, it's more, why would a developer be disinclined to create high rises? Are they not profitable above a certain level? Like, to me, again, this is just based on my own very rudimentary research. Again, building a high-rise, actually, it's quite profitable because you're building more units on a smaller piece of land. I don't know that, I'm not a builder, but to me, it's more efficient and probably more viable for a developer to do that. So I don't know why we'd have to incent that, because I think it'd be a behavior that they would be inclined to do regardless.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, I think the comment that I would make to that is oftentimes what's actually easier to build, not necessarily as hard, is the low rise. It's easier. There's a very clear return on investment. The market research shows in these particular areas, specifically within Niagara, that low rise sells. That is what is often easier. We have not really tested the market at something of the height that we are talking about, really outside of, I would suggest, in most of Niagara. And so I think that's why we're looking at incentivizing it. You can take the falls, and I remove the falls because they're a world unto themselves. There really hasn't been a test market, definitely nowhere in West Niagara. Grimsby's is all in that 6 to 8 story range. And so I think we need to look at, the market and the market driving something of that significant. It is much more significant that we've seen, and so we believe incentivizing that to create the type of housing variation, the stock variation that we've often talked about at our housing task force is important to the community. And then notwithstanding the comments that Kathleen, Matt, and Paul have made around the importance of looking at that as a way to bring people in this particular area, to increase the density, to make sure that the shops that we have there, the employment opportunities that we have there are sustained there.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I think we do need that variable element of stock. And it's just to me, because I think that is going to be such an attractive commodity, I think it's in probably developers' best interest to have that included regardless. So I don't know why. Again, I think maybe just we need a little more due diligence on that. Again, Mr. Dien, if you want to speak to it.
Thank you, Chair. And when we talk about density, I don't want to lose the fact that we're also saying that the density at Prudhommes is going to help other parts of our community, right? So as we get some redevelopment in Vineland, the density that you see at Prudhommes could then start shopping in Vineland. It's come to be, and so support the other businesses we have in our community. So density just doesn't help what we're trying to do at Prudhommes, it helps community-wide.
No, and not disagreeing. It's just to me, a very good point. It's more or less just maybe a little more research on the requirement to incent to that level. Again, not that we shouldn't have that level. It's just, is there a requirement for us to incent on it? So we do have a couple more people in the queue. Councillor Pachariva.
Thank you, Chair Russell. And just to comment on the affordable housing units and a free-for-all when they come out, would we not be working with Niagara Regional Housing to set up some type of schematic to fill the need? What is there, 10,000 units were underserved, 1 and 2 bedrooms? So by incentivizing the builder, we can create a certain number, like these aren't gonna go on the market. So we work directly with Niagara Regional Housing and we fill that void.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think there's 2 ways to deliver affordable housing. One is through Niagara Region, which is almost like a landlord and owns a number of units. And the other is working directly with the sector, like the Indewells of the world and others that provide. So there's 2 ways to look at it.
So we've got 2 options.
There's 2 options often in terms of how housing is provided, specifically affordable housing.
Okay, excellent. 3, because I just wanted to dispel that rumor that, when they come on board, then, it's a free-for-all with everyone buying units and then, doubling the rent and all that kind of stuff. And just, what, and I don't mean to point fingers at anyone or any developer, but I will. Just take a drive through the fairgrounds and take a drive through Cache and see what you get when you don't incentivize. We had 2 apartment buildings going in Prudhommes, or not in Prudhommes, in the fairgrounds. And they were going to be affordable housing. They were going to be housing for seniors. And we didn't incentivize, and look what we got. So I just, there's both sides of the coin we need to take a look at. And, we're nowhere near the end of this. So just, a couple of those unknowingness that I just want to clarify. Thank you, Chair Russell.
Those are excellent points to clarify, and I had a wonderful little bird mention in my ear the exact same thing about the NRH, and I think that does dispel a lot of the concerns about the affordable housing and matching up to people who need those houses at that price point. So we also have Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to weigh in on the some of the comments that Councillor Brunet made, and also I think Mayor Easton, and I certainly share the uneasiness of the magnitude of this project and what expertise we have both collectively as a council and a staff in building this destination property. And I've had casual conversations about expertise in this area and bringing on potential expertise for as a guide to help us through the process. And they have been just casual conversations. Maybe, it needs to be more of a council discussion, as far as, getting more of that on the table to at least be able to lean on a organization that has done this and that has been successful in building out a waterfront property that does all the things that we are hoping this will do. We've also talked about a subcommittee, of council that would work with the developer and work on this project, longer than just approving the various approvals that we need to make. So I guess maybe a question through you, Mr. Chair, is there direction that we want to give to staff to consider, and maybe this is not the place for it as being a workshop, but just from a expertise standpoint, and somebody that is challenging where we wouldn't know to challenge, and bring on something, of that ilk, for this project, since it is the once in a lifetime project for the town. Do we make that kind of investment? So through you, Mr. Chair, maybe just from a comment standpoint at this point, Mr. CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor McPherson's comment. I think it's a good comment, and maybe I'll go back to the question by answering, I think, the subcommittee or task force piece that we're looking at setting up. That is a group that once we receive our subsequent submission from the development group, we will be seeking to strike and having that type of conversation with council. So staff is definitely open to that seeking of some third party that can share with us just what's worked, what hasn't worked in other places. I think always seeking that type of information is important. In no way do I think staff take that comment to be a reflection of our expertise or lack thereof in that comment. I think it's just a matter of making sure that we are informed and as informed as possible. And so I can take that more as gentle suggestion without official direction. I hear council loud and clear, continuing to be informed, continuing to look at what others are doing. I know there was a number of experts that we utilized when I was with the City of Hamilton on the waterfront development at Bayfront that provided us that level of expertise as well. And so I think we can definitely reach out.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Chair. This is absolutely in no way a statement that we are not doing everything we possibly can to make this the best project we can. But if there is a company or there is an organization that knows the things that you should and should not do, and also is a guide to open our eyes to other other things that could be incorporated into the project, I think that's what we'd be looking for. Thank
Through
you,
you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, absolutely, and I think in no way, I want to reaffirm, in no way did we take it in a negative way. Again, continuing to make sure we are informed, we're looking at what others are doing. I think there's no better way to learn and make sure that collectively, council and staff as a team are delivering on the best project here.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. We have Councillor Miklick. Oh, there we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just following up on that, like, did we not already hire a consultant to, he was here last, in December. There was a gentleman here. Did we not already have a?
Through you, Mr. Chair, so I think as it relates to the CIP, you know, we did hire a consultant that's done a number of CIPs, but I think what, if I can maybe anecdotally try to interpret what the councilor's saying, at various times in this process, if you go back right to the beginning, we hired Ken Greenberg, really a world-renowned national expert who helped us with the design charrette. I think continuing to have those types of inputs are essential and important. You know, CIPs are very mandated and legislated in a lot of ways and prescribed. The iterations and the conversations that need to happen, but you know, in terms of how much to incentivize, is maybe where we seek expertise and where we look at various forecasting and projected scenarios. But I think what the councillor is suggesting is that, you know, when we look at overall, I would suggest not at a micro level, but at a macro level, developments like this. Are there experts that have designed developments like this that could say to us, you know, have you thought of that? Have you thought of this? And again, not in any way being critical of the process, but rather just that third eye, that eighth eye, that 10th eye on this process.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just trying to get an understanding of who's doing what and what, you know, whose role with regards to the whole process and, you know, hiring out expert opinions. Like I wasn't sure exactly what that gentleman's role. Honestly, I'm surprised he's not here tonight as well. Like I thought, you know, he was quite involved in the last presentation, and I'm surprised he's not here tonight. That's all. Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think just to the councillor's comment around, you know, not having a consultant here who can talk very specifically about what they eat, live, and breathe. I think, you know, taking a step back and looking at why we do them is really what I wanted council to leave with here today in this workshop format. Not the specifics of this one, not the amount of the percentage, not a debate necessarily on how strict the criteria are or not what is leads and what is not leads and all of that, because I think that still requires significant conversation. So I think from our perspective, and Councillor, I think your point about so many people being involved with this is a good one. And I will turn it, I think, slightly opposite and suggest, I think that's why we've gotten to the place we've gotten with such a great team internally, externally, amongst council, is because you've had multiple people, an expert like Ken Greenberg handling a design charrette, a development that is $1 billion development like this not to be appealed, to have 5 people stand up here and speak to this, of which half of the 5 had a few concerns and the others were positive, I think is a testament to the level of engagement that's happened on this project. And you've been, both before you were a member of council and now since a member of council, been at some of those meetings at Victoria Shores, where we had hundreds of people in a room and we were being bombarded with questions and narrowed it down to really 5 key issues that they had, and the primary one being connectivity and that one particular road. I think is, again, a testament to the process and all the experts that have been involved in council's level of engagement. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seo and Councillor Miklick. We are coming to a very close close, but we have Councillor Reimer with some commentary.
Thank you, Chair Russell. Commentary it is, no questions. Great conversation this evening. This has been a great discussion and back and forth around the table. And I wanted to speak to the part, there'll be a sense of mine and also comments, I think we've all heard them too from the community, that we're giving back to a developer or making a developer rich, and that's why we'd have some hesitancy in giving these TIGs. And that's the part that I don't think, or that I hope we don't lose sight of. For us to put our desires and our hopes and our dreams on this project is great. Those are all good. but somebody has to make money when this is all done. They didn't do this to make a little bit of money. They're doing this to make money. That's not going to change, and we're not going to get any of this done if they don't make money. There's multiple moving parts in this. There's government agencies. There's shoreline protection, fluctuating, changing markets like both the housing, the commercial, different density housings, different density housing projects here. There's a lot of moving parts, and I don't think we have to, maybe we don't agree or respect that part of the process, that someone has to make money when this is all done, but I think we at least need to understand that that's a part of this. And if we want this to happen, if we look, 10 years down the road that say this is all finished and everything's great, and that someone's made money, we have to understand that's part of why we're doing this. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Remmer. That was a good comment. And again, I think it goes back to the understanding of, sure, there is probably investment required, and it's just, again, having that ability to answer back and give some value or some consideration about value back to existing residents, not future residents, is the existing ones. And as long as we can always keep that as one of the pillars of making our decisions, I think going forward, we're never going to lose sight of why we're here. No. And I don't see any other commentary coming in, so the next step in the process involves finalizing the draft CIP and the incentives and presenting them to council. After the draft CIP and the incentives will be circulated to agency, public, and stakeholder comments. Before we do close, I just want to make a couple comments on my own very quick. Like Councillor Reimer just mentioned, I just want to thank everybody for the commentary. I thought a lot of great viewpoints on all sides of the fence were shared, and I think a lot of understanding was established that maybe have been misconceptions prior. And again, this being one of the things that keeps me up at night around the horseshoe, I do feel better about where we are, and I just to take off what the mayor, there seems to be a common theme for the last few months. I think somewhere, and I mentioned this in an email earlier to CAO, somewhere between where we started and where we're going to end up, there is definitely a compromise. And again, we will get there, and I did mention earlier that there's a lot of talent in this room. There's a lot of talent in Town Hall, and I do look forward to working with everybody to try to figure out what that best map is to get where we want to go, and to make sure that, again, all parties come away with some sort of satisfaction. So again, that's my little final commentary. There being no further discussion, we have a motion to review or to receive and file the presentation provided by the Community Improvement Plan Workshop. We require a mover for the motion. Councillor Timmers. All in favor? None opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Confidential items, we have none. Staff remarks. Everybody's remarked out. Committee remarks. Likewise. There being no further business, I call this meeting adjourned at 6:10.